The world is witnessing a quiet but seismic shift in power dynamics as debt transforms from an economic challenge into a geopolitical trap for the global south. Over the past decade, developing nations, already strained by pandemic recovery, climate disasters, and rising interest rates, have piled on record levels of debt. But what was once seen as a path to growth has now become a chain of dependency, tying these countries to the whims of creditors, whether they be Western financial institutions, China, or private bondholders. The result is a new form of economic subjugation, where sovereignty is quietly bargained away in exchange for solvency. The roots of this crisis lie in a perfect storm of external shocks. After the 2008 financial crisis and even more so during the COVID-19 pandemic, many global South governments borrowed heavily to keep their economies afloat. But as the U.S. Federal Reserve and other central banks raised interest rates to combat inflation, the cost of servicing that debt exploded. Since many of these loans are denominated in dollars, a stronger greenback means crushing repayment burdens. Countries like Zambia, Sri Lanka, and Ghana have already defaulted, while others, Pakistan, Egypt, Tunisia, teeter on the brink. What makes this crisis geopolitical, rather than just financial, is who holds the debt, and what they demand in return. Traditional lenders like the IMF and World Bank impose strict austerity measures, cuts to social spending, privatization of state assets, and deregulation. These conditions often trigger public unrest, as seen in Ecuador and Lebanon, where protests erupted over fuel subsidy cuts and currency collapses. But the bigger shift is China's role as the world's largest bilateral creditor. Unlike Western institutions, Beijing rarely demands policy reforms, at least not openly. Instead, it seeks strategic concessions. Access to ports, mineral rights, or diplomatic loyalty. Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, controversially leased to China after Colombo couldn't repay its loans, is the most infamous example, but similar dynamics play out across Africa and Latin America. This debt dependency is redrawing alliances. Desperate for relief, some nations pivot toward Beijing, joining its Belt and Road Initiative or supporting China's positions in forums like the UN. Others, wary of falling into a debt trap, seek alternatives. India and Japan have stepped up infrastructure financing in Southeast Asia, while Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE now offer loans with fewer strings attached. Meanwhile, Western powers, realizing their influence is slipping, are scrambling to reform the global financial architecture, calling for debt relief, longer repayment terms, or even rival lending programs to counter China. But the most insidious effect of the debt crisis is how it limits sovereignty. When a nation spends 30 to 40% of its revenue just servicing debt, as in Angola or Kenya, it has little left for healthcare, education, or climate adaptation. Governments become caretaker administrations, managing crises rather than pursuing long-term development. And when creditors, whether China, the IMF, or private bondholders, dictate terms, national priorities bend to their demands. This isn't just economic coercion, it's a slow erosion of self-determination. The coming years will test whether the global south can break this cycle. Some countries are pushing for collective action, like the debtors cartel proposed by Barbados to renegotiate terms. Others are exploring radical solutions. Debt for climate swaps, where lenders forgive loans in exchange for environmental protections, or a return to industrial policy to reduce import dependency. But without systemic change, such as overhauling the IMF's voting structure or regulating predatory lending, the debt crisis will remain a tool of geopolitical control. In the end, the struggle over debt is a struggle over power. The nations of the global south are caught in a financial vice, where the choice between default and dependence shapes their place in the world order. Those that escape will reclaim their futures, those that don't may find that debt, more than any army, is the ultimate weapon of domination in the 21st century.